All right, we are back at the RSA conference here for day 2, and straight away it's been a pretty awesome day, and I want to talk to you about a fantastic presentation that we just came out. This one was from Tom Kellermann from VMware. Now, Tom is a very prestigious guy in the world of cybersecurity, sits on many different forums and advisory boards, including in the Secret Service. And this talk was all about the modern day bank heist. The title was called Escalation from Heist to Hostage. So basically, robbing banks in the modern era. And the talk was every bit as cool as that title made it sound. So before we start, so this talk was actually based on a report that VMware bring out every year. So if you want to read the report, I will leave a link to the public area where you can download that. But I want to share with you the high-level takeaways and my kind of commentary over what Tom said, and certainly one of my favorite talks so far. So let's get stuck in. Okay. So key takeaways. So what I said is based on a report. So 126 CISOs were interviewed in this, and sharing some pretty in-depth knowledge, which is kind of rare in this crowd. So it's great to see a report that brings this out. One of the major takeaways, I guess, like the headline that you want, is a 400% increase in cybersecurity. Now, I usually like to stay away from hyperbolic statements of fear-mongering in cybersecurity, but if you're Tom Kellermann, you can and you can back up statements like this, which you can, then it's okay. So this is obviously a huge increase in security threats that we're facing, and 400% of basically what these top-level security executives have been feeling from. And this has been a massive increase in the financial area, in particular from rogue nation states, as Tom was saying. So a lot of people don't really understand, but places like rogue states like North Korea actually do bank heist. They do this through cybersecurity. They've actually conducted, North Korea allegedly was responsible for the largest bank heist in the world. They aimed to steal $2 billion. I think they ended up getting away with 80 million, but that's a story for another day. So this is actually something that's kind of been increasing. These attacks from rogue nations, which is pretty much trying to combat these the tariffs that are being put on them, and other measures that countries are placing on these states. So it's becoming from this criminal world where you can't imagine, 30 years ago, a bank robber being held up as this national icon. But as Tom was saying, these people are now considered, almost patriotic heroes of the country, these criminals conducting this. And the financial sector, we know, is the best protected area, but it faces the most well-prepared adversaries, as Tom was saying. Now, one of the most interesting things that he said in this talk is the shift that the pandemic has brought on. So what he said is that the pandemic really hurt traditional crime. So when you're talking about smuggling in drugs and these other organized crime sectors, that the pandemic hurt, just like other businesses, hurt them significantly. So then we saw this shift into cybercrime, and what kind of was the second-class citizens of cybercrime, what Tom said, actually came forward. And I found this really interesting because it's not out of perspective. Of course, we saw an increase in cyber attacks, but I wasn't really thinking of the cyber attacks of this really high level in the financial sector. So interesting to see that. And like everything with the pandemic, it's going to be interesting to see if this continues or it's a trend and will rotate back into traditional crime. Sounds weird. So this here was absolutely the best fact from the talk, the one that really made me kind of step back and say, well, 51% of CISO experienced attacks that targeted the head of strategy. So remember, we're talking about financial institutions here. So what does this mean? So that stat may not mean a lot to you, but if you think about it, the attacks are targeting strategic people in the company, because what the attackers know is that it's not the financial assets, or capital that is of value. It's the knowledge of what is going and their strategic inside, direction. Basically, that knowledge of whether or not what could bring stock prices up or down, and getting that knowledge. This was crazy to me that attackers are so sophisticated that they're going onto that. This really shows that this isn't kind of, a teenager in the basement trying to hack into the bank. No. This is very sophisticated cyber attacks that are targeting these financial sectors, and targeting people to gain access to that information. This was just a wild fact for me, and to see that the 51% of CISOs have experienced this is crazy. Absolutely crazy. All right, now, Tom mentioned some best practices. I don't want to plagiarize the report. I just want to provide what I thought was really interesting. And one thing that he said is that, not to use messaging systems like Slack. If you're experiencing an attack, use places like Signal. Assume that everything has been compromised. And I find this interesting because when I talk about discovering credentials inside organizations for that attack path, I always talk about trying to get access to a Slack channel, because they're high-value targets, because developers often pass API keys, database credentials inside Slack channels. And so this is really kind of confirming that, hey, if you're experiencing something, don't talk about the attack in places where the attack is probably listening. Assume that they're listening in there. Thought that was a really quite interesting take of it, and definitely something to consider. All right. Now, some other quite interesting facts that Tom talked about here was that he talked about going away from Fort security and moving into the Supermax security. Now, I've talked about the Fort mode, where you build up the walls and insiders, once an attacker comes in, they can move laterally between systems. He went a bit further than saying that. And what he talked about is that the Supermax prisons weren't just built by the best prison architects, they were built by psychologists, cognitives and social psychologists, because in these prison situations, the kind of hostage scenarios or the prison takeovers start from the inside. And he suggested that that's how we need to start thinking about security, from this inside-out perspective. I thought that was really quite interesting, because it's a take. Well, we've probably all heard this before, right? The fort and the moat, and insiders aren't a threat and outsiders can't get in. But this is a whole nother kind of way of thinking about it. It's just that, okay, like stopping something from building from the inside. Very interesting. And the last takeaway that I want to leave, that I took from this talk, intruder suppression, and hunting, which means hunting and containing an adversary without them knowing. I was kind of thinking about, okay, this is one of those statements where it sounds really cool, probably very difficult to do, but something to think about. And I really liked the way that he thought about this. It made security in this financial sector sound incredibly fascinating, and from it. So again, this is just the high levels from what Tom's presentation was all about. I highly recommend, if you're in the RSA conference, go watch that talk on the replay. Fantastic talk. You might need to listen to it a couple of times. I don't know how Tom crammed so much information into there in such a short time, but I think I had to watch it a couple of times, I'm not ashamed to say. And also check out that report if this is interesting. Certainly one of the best presentations that I've seen today, and I'm going to be coming back with some more videos of what I'm enjoying in the RSA. If you're at the RSA conference, if you're loving something, if you want to come talk to me about what you're enjoying, then reply in the comments, and I'd love to hear from you guys. All right, thanks. I'll see you soon.